Welcome to our Freshwater Stewardship Community Webinar Series. We're really happy to have you here today, and we're excited to introduce our keynote presenter, Lina, who is the Habitat Programs Director with Watershed Watch Salmon Society. We also have two Watersheds Canada staff members with us. My name is Nicole. I'm the Freshwater Health Coordinator, and we also have Monica, who's the Communications and Fundraising Manager. Monica will be able to help you on the back end. If you're having any tech problems or you have any questions about Zoom, feel free to send her a private message. And now a little bit about Watersheds Canada. We're a nonprofit and charitable organization based in Perth, Ontario. We deliver programs across the country in partnership with landowners, community groups, and students who are looking to take action to protect their local freshwater. So on the screen, you can see a couple of photos of our different programs. On the top left, we have our Natural Edge program, where we work with community groups and shoreline owners to naturalize their property using native plants. And on the bottom left, we have our Love Your Lake program, which is delivered in partnership with the Canadian Wildlife Federation. And it's a shoreline evaluation program where we fill out an assessment for each property on a lake. And the property owner gets custom recommendations that are voluntary for their property so that they can help protect the health of their lake. And then on the top right, you can see our fish habitat restoration program. So in that photo, you can see a winter spawning bed enhancement project. So we put river stone up on top of the ice, and then in the springtime, it fell into place. And then finally, on the bottom right, we have a newer program, which is our Nature Discover program. And it's aimed at children and youth, and we help provide them with tools to safely enjoy nature. And then there's the program that we're all here for today, the Freshwater Stewardship Community, which is an online community that's connecting people from across the country. So we're on year 3 of this community. It launched in 2021. And we have many of our webinars and handouts archived on our website. So you can find 23 webinars and 17 handouts there. You just visit watersheds.ca freshwater-stewardship, and that's where you can find them. So I'd encourage you to check those out after today. And we'd also just like to thank the Peterborough KM Hunter Charitable Foundation and the SM Blair Family Foundation for their funding support this year. I also just wanted to take a moment to let you know about our upcoming webinars. So we've got one next week and the week after that are exciting, that are continuing our theme about lake health and fish populations. And you can also sign up for those on our website. And now I'm excited to introduce our speaker. Lina is the Habitat Programs Director with Watershed Watch Salmon Society, a science-based charity that advocates for BC's wild salmon and the waters in which they live. She works to build relationships between people and their local watersheds in an effort to encourage and share an appreciation for the waters around us. Lina is a strong proponent of collaborating across diverse interest groups, bringing together the concept of water for life to the forefront of decision-making in the Lower Mainland. Lina advocates and engages at all levels of government to achieve appropriate standards and stable funding for salmon habitat in the Lower Fraser. Her work includes promoting floodplain governance and fish-friendly flood control that is safe for fish and protects our communities. We're going to get started with the presentation. If you think of any questions throughout, feel free to write them in the chat, and then we will answer those at the end. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Lina.
Okay, so just getting confirmation that you can see my screen.
Yes, you can see your screen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicole. Hi, everybody. It's really great to be invited. Thank you so much, Watersheds Canada, for inviting me to present today and share some of the work that we are doing here in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. My name, as Nicole's already shared, is Lina Azeez, and I work for Watershed Watch Salmon Society. Before we get into, now let's see here. All right, there we go. Before I tell you about the work that we do, I'd like to share a little bit about myself. I was actually born in Sri Lanka, which is this beautiful tropical island in the Indian Ocean, known for too much water or too little water, and with the monsoons and such. And that's just me bathing a baby elephant. So I grew up, I didn't really grow up there, but I do have strong memories of massive thunderstorms and just always being in or around water, be it the ocean or in rivers or bathing from a well and stuff like that. So water has always been a very important and connecting part of my life journey. But then I grew up in the Middle East, and that was almost the opposite. I grew up in Dubai, which was completely dry and super arid, and we really celebrated when there was rain. We didn't fear it there, unlike in Sri Lanka. So in Dubai, when it would rain, I remember we'd be in school, we'd stop everything we were doing if it started to rain in the wintertime and rush outside to go play in the water and celebrate it. So that's where I grew up, and that's my connection to water. And then we moved to Canada. My family moved to our beautiful emerald temperate rainforest here in British Columbia, and I got to experience the temperateness of it all, which is really wonderful, and understand how you can live in some amount of harmony with water. Although, of course, as the climate changes, we are learning more and more how volatile all of that can be. That photo of me on the left is in 2015. I got an opportunity to canoe and raft down the length of the Fraser River, which is amazing. We spent 25 days on the water, meeting with just connecting with communities along the way. And when we were coming through the canyon, the Fraser Canyon, I got to witness how the indigenous communities along the canyon dried their salmon using the wind, and the value and the benefits of doing so, which is really neat. And it made a connection for me that brought me, it was almost full circle, brought me right back to where it all began in Sri Lanka, where over there, it's very common practice to sun dry your tuna, which is the primary fish that's eaten there, as well as, of course, the small fish. But it just kind of brought back like all the work that I've been doing with water and with salmon and fish in general, and why this resource, this source of food and life is just so important for all of us. And it really connected me back to the work I was doing in this amazing full circle moment. So that was an aha moment for me, being on the Fraser in 2015. So just a little bit about Watershed Watch then. So we are a salmon advocacy, salmon conservation and advocacy organization. We've been around since about 1998, and we have a number of different campaigns that we work on. Our longest running campaign has been around the aquaculture, so getting fish farms out of wild salmon migration routes. We also advocate quite hard for responsible harvesting, commercial harvesting of salmon, and in particular, looking to protect endangered runs. We are very involved with protecting our freshwater resources for fish and nature in general through our watershed security work. And the project that I'll be focused on today is called Connected Waters, where we're looking to restore and reconnect waterways in the Lower Fraser in particular, but this can of course be expanded and thought about in like every floodplain across British Columbia and across Canada. So we're looking to restore and reconnect waterways in the Lower Fraser that are impacted by flood control structures. So that's our work for Connected Waters. So the reason we're doing this is because in the Lower Fraser, with colonization and with just the development of the floodplain, we have lost about 85% of our floodplain. Wetlands have been drained, floodplains have been ditched and diked and removed, removed in order to make arable farmland, industrial sites, and of course, cities and suburban areas. About 300,000 people, now more, I believe, live in the Lower Fraser floodplains. So clearly it's an area that's very highly developed. And by doing so, we have removed a lot of important habitat for salmon. One of my focuses is looking at the impacts of flood infrastructure on little baby salmon. So the little guys, as they're swimming down the Fraser and out to the ocean, they often duck into side channels, tributaries, and sloughs of the Fraser River, overwintering and rearing, so that they're strong enough and big enough. They know how to hunt. They're ready to take on the ocean in a way. So what we've noticed is as we built dikes along the Fraser and tributaries of the Fraser, we are actually cutting off the flow of water and the flow of nutrients and just basic access for fish, for salmon to these important habitats. At the same time, many of these structures are put in 50, 100 years ago, and they're severely undersized. They are blocking salmon access, and they're not really protecting our communities anymore. If some of you recall, back in November 2021, we had that huge atmospheric river event that inundated the lower mainland, and we saw firsthand. Once again, this is nothing we were surprised at, unfortunately, but we saw the huge impacts of having undersized flood infrastructure with the very near loss of the Sumas pump station and such. But of course, these upgrades are really, really expensive. And we're not really convinced that hard infrastructure is the way to go when it comes to protecting our communities anymore. And more we're learning from around the world that we can look at multi-benefit solutions that will continue to protect our communities, as well as provide climate adaptation, meet climate adaptation goals, and in the case of Watershed Watch, consider the needs of salmon as well. And surprise, surprise, currently our flood control structures, as they are being upgraded, are not required to be nature-based or fish-friendly, which means, and I'll show you what this means because we have I'll have some examples to show you, but yeah, essentially they don't need to be fish-friendly. However, after the 2021 floods, we were able to get our Minister of Public Safety, Mike Farnworth, to say that indeed, as we rebuild and build back, we need to make sure that a flood control infrastructure is fish friendly. So that was the first time we started using those words, and I thought it was a win, but what a terrible way to get it. We really wanted to be more proactive than reactive. All right, next slide. So when we started this work, we decided to map the issue. We're currently in the process of updating this map. It's from 2016. And the reason we're updating it is because we've actually started to get some work done on the ground to make certain sites fish friendly. But what you can see here is in our initial assessment, we identified at least 1,500 kilometers of salmon habitat that is impacted by at least 156 flood control structures. So over the past 5-6 years, we've been slowly chipping away at this number. And now we have about 151 flood control structures that are still affecting salmon. So the others are either completed or in process. So we're very encouraged by that, although as you can see, it takes some time to do this work. Also, just to know, we have focused on the Fraser watershed, the Lower Fraser watershed. This map does not show the sites impacted in the Surrey boundary area, for example, but there's definitely a lot of good work happening there as well. Also, just bringing back the need to consider the multi-benefit approach. The province and the feds are looking to spend bunches and bunches of money on creating healthier watersheds and $647 million to save our declining salmon populations. Yet at the same time, we continue to have the same kind of land use planning and same kind of hard engineering solutions that are shown to impact salmon. So on the one hand, we're trying to help them, and on the other, we are continuing to destroy their habitat. So we really need to align our objectives, and that's one of our biggest messages at all levels of government. So this is just a photo from the November 2021 floods. You can see much of the Sumas Prairie underwater. Of course, if you might not know if you don't live in the area, but the Sumas Prairie used to be this ginormous lake back in the day that was drained about 100 years ago and completely destroyed the way of life for the Sumas people of the area. So Sumas, now it's called Sumas Prairie, and it's some of the most arable agricultural land in British Columbia. It has the highest population of cows and chickens who were also very much affected by these floods, and corn, hay, all of that is grown in the area. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, our flood management system is broken in a variety of ways. And so what we're trying to do is fix that. So we're looking at those tangible on the ground solutions, but we're also looking at what it means to plan in a more complete and more comprehensive, holistic way. And so that's where floodplain governance comes into the mix. And I'll speak about that a bit more later. So, and currently the way funding models work, it's just status quo, status quo, status quo. And that is clearly not working, as you can see in this picture. So our focus has been around avoiding hazards, but really we need to be reducing risk. We need to consider more seriously the impacts of climate change and build in true resilience. We need to consider the impacts to our ecological and social systems. And we are not, and that's one of the commitments of the province, are to incorporate UNDRIP and DRIPA. So that's giving Indigenous communities more say over their traditional territories and a seat at the table. So you might have seen photos like this from the 2021 atmospheric river, but as I was saying earlier, so many, like, we think we're protecting our communities when we build up dikes, but instead we're giving ourselves a false sense of hope that we're not going to be that we're protecting, build a wall and we'll protect ourselves doesn't always come to fruition, as this image shows. A lot of people lost land and their livelihoods. But solutions are plenty. We have been working on them, as I've been saying, and we are engaging every level of government because of the multi-jurisdictional complexity of flood infrastructure. Every level of government does have a role to play. And what we've been trying to do is change the perspective from managing floods, which floods is a natural phenomenon, and really we need to think about how do we live with and manage for floods. Yes, it's going to flood. We have to, that's a given, but we can't stop that. So how we're going to live with water. And then we need to stop the funding of fish killing infrastructure, and we need to align our funding models with federal and provincial objectives and use a whole of society approach, not just multi-benefit, as I was saying earlier. That's one of my favorite words these days. So this is an example of a pump station that's built. This is in the city of Pitt Meadows. It's 80% of the land is at or below sea level in this community. And so almost all of it is diked around, and you have pump stations like this that move the water from the land side to the river side in order to keep water levels low at all times, to protect the communities and the farmland and the train tracks and, of course, critical infrastructure and everything else. Unfortunately, areas like this are pump stations like this are actually fish killing pump stations, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. So this is what you might find behind waterways, behind dikes. They're often stagnant. They tend to infill. Water quality is very poor. Oxygen levels are low. You can have fish kills, and it's overall not a great place. Even if you wanted to go for a walk by one of these canals, it wouldn't be very pleasant. Here's an example of a tide gate that's supposed to be fish friendly, in that it's supposed to open and allow water out and allow water in, and vice versa with the fish. But as you can see here, even with water levels so low on the downstream side, the gate barely opens and fish barely pass through. So I just have a video here showing you during the atmospheric river, another city, actually the city that I live in, Port Coquitlam, had to install additional pumps to try to move water as fast as possible over the dike. At the same time, because this was a November, salmon are coming in and trying to spawn. So you're going to see, in this image, you're going to see a salmon trying to make its way up the pipe and into the machinery. And it's not going to survive. This is really not how we should be having flood control infrastructure, because it really is detrimental to fish. Just give it a step. So that's one trying to get through, but one actually gets into the pipe. So this is let's call this not good. fish friendly, and this is not good flood infrastructure. And this is the impact of pump stations. They chop up fish, and it's just it's not great. So we need to change this. And the problem that we often hear from local governments who own this infrastructure is it's too expensive, and then the province says we just don't fund it. So funding mechanisms need to change. So we created some animations to kind of show how these infrastructure work, just to try to help decision makers understand what happens. And the pump station I showed you just a bit earlier works like this, cuts up fish, not great. However, there are fish-friendly versions of this that do exist. And now we've actually realized the price levels are quite comparable. So we are strongly advocating for infrastructure like this to be incorporated. Similar to pump stations are floodgates, which do a lot of work in moving water and can often be very, very, actually more effective than pump stations in the long term. This is a pump station, a tide gate that does not work well. As you can see, it opens just a tiny bit and just lets a few fish in, if at all. A study that we are partnering on in with a PhD student at UBC has found that gates like this only allow in maybe 7% of fish. So they tagged fish and sent them through, and noticed that only about 7% were getting through. However, in a fish-friendly gate like this, they were noticing about 60% of fish were able to get through, and there was better exchange of water. Therefore, quality of habitat behind the dikes were much improved. And the gates work in a way that when the water goes up, the gate goes down, so it actually continues to protect the community behind it. So solutions do exist, and we kind of put that into play back in November, in 2021, where before, as you can see the photo on the left, there was this old, small floodgate that's top hinged and barely opened. It's full of sticks. Fish couldn't get through. Water wasn't really passing. It was overall very, very ineffective. Luckily for the community this was installed in, it was the new gate was installed 1 week before the atmospheric river. And that really saved the community, because this is the main thoroughfare for water and drainage for the community of Advocacy. And the gate worked wonderfully. It was able to protect the community, whereas many other gates in the community of Advocacy actually were overtopped. So this one worked really wonderfully. And then in the spring, we actually went in with some students and we cut a ribbon and celebrated the installation of this fish-friendly gate, and planted a bunch of salmon habitat around it to improve the area. So it's not just about fish-friendly engineered structures, but also putting in some of those nature-based solutions, so softer infrastructure as well. Just transitioning over to some of the governance stuff. As I mentioned earlier, we've been learning a lot from other jurisdictions around the world. I wanted to share one. There's a couple. One is Room for the River in the Netherlands, which is this great comprehensive program that took 10 years and did a whole bunch of river engineering and river management work to protect their communities, but also to improve habitat for fish, because that was a European Union directive. And much closer to home for us, just across the border in Washington State, is this great program called Floodplains by Design, where they have been slowly, I think again over 10 years actually, been building collaborations, building trust between stakeholders and rights holders who previously would not have been sitting around the same table. So those are conservation organizations, farmers, indigenous communities, the state in their case, and the federal government all came together because there was a huge flood event, many actually, and they decided enough was enough, and they really needed to work together to ensure that multiple values were being met at the same time, be it recreational values, economic values, fisheries values, and agricultural, and of course, community safety. And what that looked like was working with the state government to create a large and sustainable funding pot that could support the counties and the local governments in planning and incorporating resiliency into their communities. And that can look like setting back dikes, or in their case, levees, setting back levees and creating more room for the rivers to flow and flood, allowing for planning for less risky ventures, like putting in parks, perhaps, or subsidizing or supporting farmers to allow their fields to flood and letting that happen, and moving people out of the floodplain, actually paying for land and paying for people's homes, and relocating them and making life a bit less hazardous. And this program has been quite successful. We are mentoring from this program, I guess, and learning a lot from Floodplains by Design, and looking to incorporate that into our own work here in BC. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of our work is focused in the Lower Mainland. So actually, all of our work is focused in the Lower Mainland, just because it is one of the most diked jurisdictions in all of Canada. We have the salmon, which is a hugely valuable resource and a part of British Columbia's identity, and the Fraser River. So it's a many things layered on top of each other happening here. So when the floods happened and the atmospheric river happened in November 2021, a number of organizations came together, and it's so funny because we actually came together wanting to discuss technical solutions, and let's create webinars and workshops and like start to just help educate decision makers and local engineers and consulting companies who support local governments in how to do fish-friendly flood control better. But then the floods happened, and all we could think about is how there would be millions of dollars poured into this region to rebuild, and rebuilding would not be multi-beneficial, would not consider fish, and it would be building back to what was, because that's the way the funding pots are right now. So we came together and created a collaborative called the Build Back Better Together Collaborative, and we are First Nations led by the Emergency Planning Secretariat. We have conservationists, farmers, environmental legal specialists, and what we decided to do was, we saw this as an opportunity to not just talk about building back better, but doing it together so that nobody was left behind in the conversations of building back better. Indigenous communities in particular were really concerned that was going to happen as local governments charged ahead with rebuilding plans, and farmers were starting to rebuild with insurance money or money provided by the province for rebuilding costs. And they really wanted to make sure we weren't making the same mistakes again. So what happened is we came together and decided that there were certain set of principles that we needed to rebuild or build back better by. And those principles are risk reduction in a changing climate had to be considered. We need to make sure that our communities are sustainable and resilient. Advancing reconciliation is top priority. Thriving salmon is an integral value that needed to be incorporated into any work that was to be done. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, everyone has to be part of the solution and no one is left behind. So the way we decided to kind of express that, I guess, was a number of ways through advocacy. So we started writing letters, sending briefing notes, and meeting with ministers at the federal and provincial levels, emergency management, public safety, Indigenous services, DFO, so Fisheries and Oceans Canada, agriculture, like municipal affairs, like meeting with all of these people, sharing our message, and getting general agreement that, yes, this is a really good idea and it has some alignment where the province would like to go, but there's still a lot more work to be done. And we realized, having all of these conversations, including with local governments, that people just wanted to get together and talk and build trust and build relationships so that they could understand at their regional and sub-regional levels what was truly needed. And so we decided to make that happen. So last year in July, we hosted our first forum, and we brought all of these people together. And this is just a photo of everyone being like, yes, we agree with these principles. Let's take these principles and start to build them out. And so that's what we've been working on the last few months, and we're planning another forum in April because people are asking for it, the First Nations and local governments in particular. And we have got buy-in from the federal government and the province to support this work, because it's expensive bringing people together and getting the right people in the room, and just the time and the energy required to put it all together, and the maps that are needed and the database that are required. So yes, it's great fun. I love bringing people together, and I'm really glad to be part of this collaborative. And yeah, I just wanted to share that floodplain, fish-friendly flood control and floodplain governance must happen together, and that's the work that that's what we are working towards. So I guess just to end, the benefits of doing so like kind of go off the page here. So I've just listed a few of them, but really, it's one of the things we do is try to get people on the water, try to get people on the waterways that are impacted by flood control structures, so they can see what it means to not manage our waterways in this multi-beneficial way, or not manage our floodplain in that way. So we do canoe tours and we do bike tours, and it's just so great to help people understand, oh my goodness, yes, this is a huge problem. We drop fish traps and pull them out, and like I said, like look at the kinds of fish that are in there. Often what we find in waterways impacted by flood control structures is we often find way more invasive fish than we would natal fish, because the waters are just warmer and less oxygen, and fish from like invasive fish are able to survive better than our native fish, which need the cleaner, cooler waters. But by doing this work, we are targeting and addressing a number of issues specifically, and one really important one that we really align with is around reconciliation. Of course, climate adaptation. Using nature-based solutions has been shown to, in the long term, be 50% cheaper than hard infrastructure solutions, and they appreciate over time versus hard structures that are known to depreciate with time. And of course, one of our biggest issues is to ensure that we are revitalizing and protecting BC's salmon populations and improving their habitats. We need to make sure that we are protecting our communities, because they are now in the floodplain, and everyone knows what real estate prices are like. It is very tricky to talk to anybody about selling their properties and moving, and then put the properties return them to floodplain habitat. But it's a conversation that needs to be had, and we're slowly starting to have it. And overall, that increases our watershed security for the area. In terms of economic benefits, we are investing in a variety of ways, including in the environmental sectors and the consulting sectors and engineering and all of that. So there's so many benefits economically as well. And as I mentioned earlier, recreation and aesthetics, it's just beautiful to live by waterways and parks that you know that will be completely safe if they flood, and that's totally fine. So yeah, I think I'll just end there and open it up for questions, comments, conversation. Yeah, and thank you for listening.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your presentation, Lina. That was great. And just before we get into the questions, I see that we have some great ones here. I wanted to let everyone know that we have a survey. So Monica is going to drop that link in the chat. And if you would just take a moment to let us know what you enjoyed about the webinar, if you have any recommendations or any other topics that you'd like to hear, we'd love to hear from you. And if you have any last questions, you can feel free to type them in. So I'll start to read them out to Lina. So the first one I see here, do you know of any programs or funding support in Canada where farmers can be compensated for allowing land to be flooded or returned to wetlands?
That is something that we are in conversation with the province, because we definitely see that as lacking. There are programs that are working towards that. Farmland Advantage, for example, is one of them. They are a payment for ecosystem services program that supports farmers to create, to actually be proactive and create those riparian buffers and actually pay them for not farming those lands. So I guess that's one way of doing that. But no, there isn't a comprehensive program that I'm aware of that does that in Canada.
And another question, is there data or a report on the cost and performance of nature-based solutions compared with hard infrastructure or flood management?
Actually, the University of Waterloo has done some really good work on this. It's through their I'm sorry, I forget the name of their think tank at the University of Waterloo, but there's some really great reports, and I'd be happy to share it. Nicole, I could share the link with you if that helps, so you can share it out to everybody. But fantastic reports that do some cost comparison. It's hard because costs really vary across the country, but overall there has been strong results that show that nature-based solutions are actually, that number I had, the 50% cheaper, is from the University of Waterloo's research. Yeah,
we'll make sure to link that research.
Yeah.
We'll send out a handout later in the week by email with the webinar recording, so everyone will be able to read that then.
Wonderful.
And then another question, do you know if the Hatsuk Lake pump station culverts and floodgates have been discussed by your group and other stakeholders like local governments and First Nations?
Yeah, Hatsuk Lake constantly comes up. So for just for a bit of background, there's a lake in the Fraser Valley area called Hatsuk Lake. It was an oxbow lake that kind of got separated from the Fraser, and a pump station was installed there. It is technically a fish-friendly pump station. However, the operations of that pump are not fish-friendly. As the primary value for the people living and using that lake are recreational, and they want to have water in the lake. And so the way that when and how they turn on the pumps is actually not fish friendly. So the lake has very poor water quality and does not connect to the Fraser very well. Also, funny enough, they put in a fish friendly pump, but then the outfall where the water flows out into the Fraser is just full of riprap, and the water splashes all over it. So sure, you can have a fish-friendly pump station, but if you're putting riprap and hard rock right where the water flows out, any fish that come through are going to just smash and crash into those rocks. So the question was, has it been discussed? It comes up constantly, but due to I know the Fraser Valley Regional District is looking to create a management plan for the area, and we will be involved with that, but not at the moment. And yes, First Nations are involved with that too, the Lakamal Nation in particular.
Perfect. And how long have these new flooding management tools been working in the Fraser approximately?
There aren't too many. There are about just a handful of them. One of the earliest that went in was a fish-friendly pump in 1996 or 1998 in the township of Langley. We are studying the efficacy of this. So that's what I was sharing earlier with the tide gate. We want to see how well they actually work, because there aren't a lot of studies done on that. Our next study, once the gate is completed, or when the studies are done for that, we'll be looking at the efficacy of fish-friendly pump stations. From what we understand, it is not 100% survival even with fish-friendly, but it's over 50% is what I'm told, but we still need to understand what that means. Yeah, so still studying that.
And do you have any guidance if there was any individuals wanting to learn more about how pumps operate in lakes that are around them?
For how to learn about that?
Yeah, if they wanted more information about lakes or rivers and the pumps that are in those areas.
Outside of the low mainland, you mean? Sorry, I need to read this
I was
question.
just trying to make it a little bit broader. So this one is, they're asking about the Hatsuk, but just more generally, if people needed more information about the pumps in their area, where could they go to find that?
Well, I don't know about the rest of Canada. I'm pretty sure it's the same, but in British Columbia, flood infrastructure used to be owned and operated by the province, but that responsibility was downloaded to the local governments in the early 2000s. And so in our case, if we wanted to find out about any of these pump stations, we would, or any kind of flood infrastructure, we would go to the local government, and because they're often the diking district. So in your area, you'd probably want to identify the diking district, the diking authority, to learn more about flood infrastructure there. If you're looking for ways to support the improvement of operations of pump stations and gates, that's a conversation to have with the diking district as well. And I would recommend, if you have the funding to do so, work with an engineering consultant so that or an academic to study that station and understand how it works so that you can make relevant suggestions. So in terms of the Hatsuk pump in particular, we were going to invest some money to study that pump station and then provide solutions, but then we're told the Fraser Valley Regional District will be doing some of that, so we've stepped back from that. And by we, I don't mean Watershed Watch only, it's this collaborative, people, the colleagues that I work with, yeah.
And do you know of a catalog of all the infrastructure that categorizes which have the greatest impact on fish kills, and the funding prioritization to replace?
Yeah, so one thing I didn't talk about because I was concerned about time was what our partner project, which is called Resilient Waters. It's resilientwaters.ca. And they have done an assessment of the 156 sites that I identified in my initial map. So they did a tabletop assessment of that and then went to highlighted 25 priority sites, I guess, like sites where we thought there would be the greatest opportunities to improve them. And so if you were to go to the Resilient Waters site, they actually have a map and a database, not necessarily categorizing them like this is the most fish unfriendly and this is the least, but more in terms of these are the like prioritized by opportunities. Like we have local government support, indigenous support, there's funding lined up, and so therefore this is a site that we can get work done at sooner rather than later. So that is on the Resilient Waters website. And all the data is open source. So if you click through to the data links, you get taken to a Google Drive.
Perfect. We'll make sure to include that link too. And that's all the questions we have for today. So if anyone else thinks of any, you can feel free to send us an email. And I just want to thank everyone else for being here today. And thank you again, Lina, for speaking. We really enjoyed that presentation.
Awesome.